Alright, so talking about the history of science, specifically with biology. Biology is actually one of the older sciences, simply because it was easier to study, especially the beginning of biology, basically, basic biology. So humans have studied living things throughout history. They've not necessarily been right throughout history. There have been several very odd beliefs. Oftentimes they would believe that if you got sick, it was because some god or something was angry with you, or that someone cursed you, different things like that. And actually wasn't until 1900s that they discovered bacteria and viruses that actually explained the diseases that people were getting. And so, okay, and for some reason it's not going, so give me a second here. There we go. Alright, so mostly the study of biology began with studying and domesticating animals. So most of the animals that we deal with on a regular basis today are not like the ancient versions of them. That makes sense. So, for example, dogs, they used to be wolves. And if you think about, meeting a wolf out in the forest somewhere, okay, it's not necessarily going to end well for you. You might be fine, but if that wolf is hungry or feels threatened by you, you might have a problem on your hands. Okay, so what they did with wolves is that they would actually keep wolves kind of to protect their animals, okay, or they would keep them like around their villages or things like that. And then over the time, they would actually mate and kind of obviously domesticate the animals that were gentlest with the humans. Okay, so the ones that got along the best with humans, could follow orders and different things like that. And so eventually, over centuries, decades, centuries, they domesticated the wolf, and then the new species of dog was created. And then, of course, you've got all the different species of dogs, and all of that. But that all comes from this studying and domestication of wolves. Okay, so there's a lot that goes into that as well with a bunch of different animals. They also would use herbal remedies to make early medicines. Those were another form of biology. Biology also deals with trying to kind of heal the body and deal with any kind of infection or pain or anything like that. You might hear people say that herbal remedies are still better than modern medicine. That's really not true. For the most part, if an herbal remedy actually works, scientists took it, figured out what in that herbal remedy works, and then figured out a way to make it work better. And that is modern medicine. So, things like that. But another of those odd beliefs that they had, Greeks believed that all living bodies had four humors, okay, and they called them four humors. So oftentimes you'll hear like Shakespeare talk about in a foul humor, okay, that actually goes back to these four fluids that they thought each body had. So obviously you have blood as the main fluid of the body. Then you have black bile, phlegm, and yellow bile. So it's kind of, yeah, we won't go into the specifics of each of those different humors. Just know it's completely wrong. So, but because of these four humors, they believed that they all had to be in balance. And if you had an imbalance in any one or multiple of your humors, that was what caused your illnesses. Okay, so if you think about the bubonic plague, it caused black boils on people's skin. So they would say that that person had too much black bile, and that's why they were sick. Okay. If somebody had like a nosebleed, well, their blood, as their humor, was out of balance. Okay, so stuff like that. It's weird stuff. Okay. So this all started to change with the scientific revolution. So before the European scientific revolution, scientific process was found mostly in China and India. China is still in, scientific research. India is in part, but they're not necessarily countries that you would think of today as being major leaders in science. That's mostly in Europe and America and Canada. Okay, some in Australia, but for the most part, we don't really think about China and India as the major scientific centers of today. They are still very, very involved. So it's not accurate to say that they're not involved at all. But again, of course, when we talk about the scientific revolution, we always have to talk about Leonardo da Vinci. So he, when we talk about biology, he was a major factor in the scientific revolution because he started to study the anatomy of humans and animals in greater detail than had been done before. He actually brought math into the study, so he dealt with the golden ratio, and I mean, really just was unbelievable with what he was able to do. But the one who is actually credited with a lot of our knowledge of anatomy, especially early knowledge of anatomy, is Andreas Vesalius. So he was a Flemish physician, and he realized that, there's only so much that we can tell about human anatomy just from looking at the outside of the body. And so he actually started doing dissections of corpses, which at the time was very socially unacceptable. So you didn't have morticians that would do autopsies on dead bodies or anything like that. Basically, it was, if the body is dead, it's dead, you bury it, you burn it, whatever. Or you just toss it on the ground or the river or, whatever. So his insistence that he needed to look beyond the surface of the body and actually dissect it in order to see how the different parts of the body actually come together and see what was underneath was pretty revolutionary. And so his dissections were, and the fact that he was able to document them so well, were actually a huge step. Then we get to the Industrial Revolution. So at this point, you see travel and communication, increasing the flow of ideas between countries, continents, different things like that. So now China and India is kind of mixing their scientific knowledge with the knowledge found in Europe. You also see the first universities founded, so they were founded as centers of this scientific and ideological, basically like as scientific and ideological havens. So that's where all of these great thinkers knew to go in order to meet other great thinkers, and then they could talk about the problems that they had recognized and figure out solutions. Again, not always correct solutions, but that's always a step in scientific discovery. So then, because you started getting advancements in technology and all of this communication, they were actually able to start developing more complex experiments. So this is when you see like telescopes come in, this is when you see the microscope come in. One of the early advancements in technology that you don't really think about, that was incredibly important for experiments, was the invention of the clock. Okay, so before they had any way of measuring a second or time incredibly accurately, they would actually have to set up a contraption that would drip a drop of water every second. Okay, and they would have to set that up by ear. So didn't necessarily get it the same every single time. okay? Because it all depended on how fast the water was flowing through this contraption. So, not exactly the most accurate means of keeping time. And then if somebody tries to recreate your experiment, I mean, they have to set up their little water drip clock thing the same way that you did, and that was pretty much impossible. So, the Industrial Revolution, coming on the heels of the Scientific Revolution, really laid the groundwork for science as we know it today. So it's not just the thinking aspect of science, but also the technological side of it, all coming together to create kind of the thought process and the experimentation of science. So that is it for this section.